Our first guest is Nick Engler. Nick is an author, craftsman, pilot, and archaeologist. In 1997, he founded the Wright Brothers Aeroplane Company, an educational foundation that draws upon the story of the Wright brothers to inspire young people and to spark youthful curiosity in science and technology. Nick manages several education programs, including a traveling museum that brings the story of the Wright brothers to life with a nationwide touring exhibition for schools, an extensive virtual museum and web resource titled Webb Brothers Aeroplane Company and Museum of Pioneer Aviation, and the Centennial Flight Project, a program through which young people from across the country participated in the construction of an authentic and airworthy replica of the world's first airplane. Nick also led a highly successful archaeology expedition to recreate and fly the 6 earliest Wright brothers experimental aircraft. Engler has authored more than 50 books, popular woodworking books, and is a contributing editor to Aero and Popular Woodworking magazines. All the magnificent flying replicas that grace the skies of Kitty Hawk, of the Kitty Hawk documentary, were meticulously researched and crafted by Nick and his dedicated team of artisans and historians. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get Nick on the line. Nick, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Well, thanks, Pat. After that introduction, I hardly know myself. I'd really like to meet that guy.
Well, that guy's a pretty popular guy, let me tell you.
Oh, I something out here in the wilds of Ohio. That's debatable. Out here, you can trip over the Wright brothers on every street corner. But thank you for the kind words. It has been a real adventure making and flying these airplanes.
I can imagine. So, Nick, to give our listeners the backstory, how did this? Obviously, with writing 50 books, with doing 50 books on woodworking, and I took a look on Amazon where a lot of your books are. You got a lot of great subjects. People that want to do woodworking, I think if you need a library for your home, there they are. You can get the Nick Engler collection. But how did the whole Wright brothers thing start for you and everything that you've put together? Maybe you could give us a little bit of the backstory and kind of bring our listeners up to speed as far as what your organizations are about and what they do.
I'll try. Well, first of all, it isn't just about the Wright brothers, and in fact, that wasn't my major goal. If there's anything I love to do more than write, it's teach. I've taught at all levels. Used to teach for Sinclair College and the University of Cincinnati, and I absolutely love it. I got to my 50th book sometime around in the late 1990s, and I had just said everything I had to say about dovetails, dados, and rabbits. I couldn't think of another thing to do, and at the same time, I was bothered by the fact that there were less and less opportunities for kids in school to learn how to use tools. I have some extremely ferocious convictions on that subject that we'll probably get into sooner or later. But I thought, well, perhaps what I can do is I've loved tools, but I've always loved tools with a scientific purpose, the engineering and the technological part of science. With the Centennial Flight coming up in 2003, perhaps we can inspire kids to pursue the hands-on sciences, the engineering sciences, by building airplanes with them. And since the Wright brothers, the story of the Wright brothers it's not just history. It is those are cultural icons. The story of the Wright brothers is the story we tell our kids when they outgrow the little engine that could.
Right.
And so every kid in America knows the story of the Wright brothers, and it's an empowering to kids because here are two ordinary guys without money or connections that achieve an age-old dream and out-invent the smartest people in the world. what could better example could you hold up for kids when you want to convince them that their dreams are worthwhile, but they have to do the work to achieve those dreams. So we started in building these airplanes. Well, the first thing I did is I built a 1902 Wright glider and began to take it around to schools and to talk about the Wright brothers and show the kids. And I immediately noticed that if it hadn't flown, it wasn't an airplane in the eyes of most kids. So before long, we took it to Kitty Hawk and started flying it. At that point, the kids really perked up. And then we got the idea that maybe we should do some more of the Wright brothers gliders. After all, they built 4 when you count their kite. So we started in on those. And pretty soon we were on a program to recreate all 6 of the Wright brothers experimental aircraft, the kite, gliders, and flyers that they had made in their pursuit of what Wilbur called a practical flying machine. In his mind, a practical flying machine was one that could take off in a variety of weather circumstances, navigate to a predetermined location, and, in his own words, land without wrecking. And having flown the first 5, that was a big deal when they finally got to that 6th and could land without wrecking. But anyway, we decided that, okay, the object here is not only to teach the kids how to work with their hands and to do aeronautical engineering, but also we need to teach them the principles of science. So we organized the program as a expedition in what is now called experimental archaeology. Experimental archaeology is a discipline that's grown up over the last 30 years, and it's basically recreating a historic event or a prehistoric event so that you can learn what the people who lived through that event must have gone through. One of the best examples are the people who knapped flints to reproduce very complex flint arrowheads like the Clovis Point, to show that, yes, indeed, people 11,000 years ago could have made these things with nothing but a piece of leather and a deer horn. You've also seen plenty of documentaries about people trying out different methods to build the pyramids. They'll build a small pyramid. That is right. Experimental archaeology. Ours is experimental archaeology as applied to industrial archaeology. We investigated the very, very beginnings of the aviation industry. And in the process, we not only built some airplanes, but we learned a great deal about the way in which the Wright brothers lived, worked, thought, and invented. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's well, you know, the story of the story of the Wright brothers is fascinating, and you know, I mean, the whole science, the whole subject of aviation is something that I think, you know, kids in school really need to take partake in and get deep involved with it, because again, talk about Kitty Hawk being I mean, the whole Wright brothers story, and I'd like to get into that a little bit tonight, because there are some things that I don't know about the Wright brothers. You know, all we ever heard, I mean, unless you research the subject heavily, it's about the 2 brothers that built the first airplane, but there was so much to that. I mean, there's so many companies that came out of back then. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Pratt and Whitney make or was it Pratt that made the engine, and then the Pratt and Whitney got into the airplane business? I mean, it was definitely the birth of aviation.
Well, I know Pratt and Whitney didn't make anything that went on a Wright flyer. I'm not exactly sure what the history of Pratt and Whitney is, but the birth of aviation is fascinating in and of itself, because it was the result of a dream that was tens of thousands of years old, and not only that, it had just recently become a science. so many people that attempted to fly before the 19th century were kooks. They were counted on as nuts. Mm-hmm. Even though some of those folks had some very solid scientific underpinnings, nobody believed it could be done. And even in the Wright brothers' day, it was a fool's dream. You had a very popular poem back then called Darius Green and His Flying Machine, written in 1869, and it became an American classic. And whenever somebody would say, "Well, I've got a design that I think for an airplane," somebody would some smart mouth in the crowd would call him Darius Green, and so it didn't have a good reputation, but it was beginning to get some scientific attention. There were some people that could believe it could be done, and in fact, the two of the most popular and visible scientists of the time of the Wright brothers, Simon Newcomb and Samuel Langley, fought back and forth about whether or not mechanical flight, human flight, was possible. Simon Newcomb, in 1903, the same year that the Wright brothers flew, published a long and popular paper in which he proved, without a doubt, that mechanical flight was impossible. So he of all people was the most surprised when he read in the paper the next day that Wilbur and Orville had flown. But the story, I think, it's especially empowering to folks in the American culture, because we inherited the land 400 years ago where there was too much to do and the spaces were too vast to cross, and we began back then to be a very inventive people because we had too much to do, and there was too much space between you and your neighbor. So we readily invented steamboats and steam engines, automobiles, bicycles, and the airplane was just in a long list of inventions that we made to try to bring ourselves together to where we could better communicate and share each other's experiences in good company.
Very good. Let me ask you, Nick. What was the first? Now, the Wright Flyer, of course, was that was the first powered aircraft, correct? That was the first airplane that had powered propulsion.
Well, no, that's not true. There were other airplanes that people had attempted to fly from the 1850s on,
okay,
that had power. If you had Wilbur and Orville here instead of me, they would poo-poo the notion that they invented the airplane. The concept of the airplane, in scientific terms, something with fixed wings to provide lift, and a controls to provide navigation, and an engine of some sort to provide propulsion. That had been around since 1799. It was first defined by a Britisher by the name of Sir George Cayley, and Cayley actually made the first gliding airplanes in 1849, and then again in 1852. He launched first a young boy aboard a glider, and then his coachman aboard a slightly larger glider. The coachman quit immediately after the first flight and never flew again, but at least Cayley was the first. But after Cayley, people began, and even before him, people like William Henson and others tried to invent powered airplanes. In 1890, a guy by the name of Clement Ader actually got one a few inches off the ground. Just a few years later, in 1893, Sir Hiram Maxim made an accidental flight aboard an airplane that wasn't quite ready to take off, but it escaped its moorings and made a haphazard flight of several hundred feet across a field before they finally shut down the engine. Nobody aboard ever had the courage to try it again. The Wright brothers, if you asked them what they did that was of any note, they would say that they made the first sustained and controlled powered flight. And the word that they would have emphasized is controlled. That was the end all and be all of the Wright brothers' research. They wanted a way to control the airplane. Nobody else was working on that problem, and they were the guys with the idea.
So obviously there was other people that had flown, but they kind of had it refined, if you will.
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, the 1890s were full of people who flew, beginning with a German by the name of Otto Lilienthal, who made a series of gliders, and was probably one of the first international superstars. I mean, he was in all the magazines. You could barely pick up a newspaper without it saying something about a flight that Lilienthal made. The problem is his airplanes were really more of parachutes than they were gliders. You couldn't control where they were going. Lilienthal, once he jumped off a cliff, had to kick this way and that in order to get the glider to sort of go where he wanted it to go. In other words, he was shifting his weight to keep the glider balanced in the air and to try to direct the glider. People who followed him, like Percy Pilcher, attempted the same thing. One of the friends of the Wright brothers, Octave Chanute, had a very successful glider called the Chanute Herring biplane, which was balanced by weight shifting. Somebody hung beneath it and did exactly what Otto Lilienthal did, just kicked this way and that. The Wright brothers realized that this was a dead end. I mean, could you imagine hanging from the bottom of a 727 or an A300, and the pilot says, "Okay, we're going to land now. Everybody kick right."
Right.
Line up with the runway. It just doesn't work. So the Wright brothers studied birds, figured out that birds use aerodynamic controls rather than weight shifting. There was quite an argument going on back in the late 1890s about how birds conducted themselves in flight. The Wright brothers believed it was aerodynamic. And just to define the term, it's like putting your hand out the window when the car is moving fast. If you angle your hand one way, the pressure on the underside of your hand raises your hand. You angle your hand the other way, and the pressure on the back of your hand pushes it down.
Right.
The Wright brothers figured that they could use that same physical phenomenon to push an airplane around the sky. And so they created a number of movable surfaces on the airplane. And the genius was not that they were the first to use aerodynamic controls, but that they were the first to hit upon the idea of three-axis control. They realized that an airplane had to move in three axes. It rolled around the longitudinal direction, going from back to front, the lateral direction, going from side to side, and then it yawed nose right and nose left. They created a control for each of those motions and managed to be the first to be able to point an aircraft in the direction they wanted to go and to keep it pointed that way.
Gotcha.
Today, as a pilot, they say, well, they teach you to keep the pointy end forward and the dirty side down. The Wright brothers were the first to be able to do that.
Exactly. Hey, you want to take a call, Nick? We got a couple here.
Yeah. Let's have somebody.
Oh, caller, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio. You're on the air with Nick.
Pat, I really enjoy your program. I listen to it every Saturday. So.
Well, thank you.
I think a bunch of people do. I mean, we don't date anymore and stuff like that. But it is very interesting.
Well, thank you.
Say, could you have him respond to a question? I don't know his name. I'm sorry, but.
Oh, you know what? We just dropped Nick for some reason. Nick, if you're listening through the live link, hang on a second. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can fix this real quick. Hold on. Let's see if we get him on. Nick, is that you?
Hey, Pat, you kind of lost me there. What happened?
I don't know what's going on. I went to pick up the other caller. Oh, no, the other caller. I dropped. Oh. My fault, guys. I apologize. I did not have it in the conference mode. The other caller will call back in again. The other red lights have to be lit up. I could fly an airplane, and I can't operate a multi-line phone. Okay, let's get him on the line. Caller, good evening. Welcome to K Talk. We got you back.
Yeah, I fell off too. Yeah, is he there?
Yes, he is.
I'm here.
What's your name?
His name's Nick Engler.
Say, Nick, Larry here. Do you ever think about who would first start experimenting with paper airplanes, as like through the ages, like watching birds and stuff? If they've had to have done that, different people that were thinkers anyway, different.
Okay, you're talking specifically about paper airplanes now, right?
Well, I'm just saying, who do you think came up with the first idea of a paper airplane to experiment with flight?
I would have to make the guess that it would have been the Chinese, being that they invented paper. But they also invented kites, which were wooden paper. In fact, the Chinese were first to use kites as the first form of manned aerial navigation. There's a very famous story about the son of a Chinese emperor who's being held captive in a castle or a palace somewhere, and he fashions a kite, and he has the servants fly him out over the battlements and into a grassy field where he lands and makes his escape. As far as folded paper airplanes, I still would go with the Chinese. It's only natural once you know how to fold paper to start making them. And of course, if it wasn't the Chinese, the next people I would guess would be the Japanese. Look at all the beautiful origami they've invented.
Yeah, they've had to have wondered though, how could they make fly like the bird with just a regular piece of paper and fold it, and put a little weight on the front and throw it. I mean, it has to have crossed their minds. So it's kind of an interesting thought. Well, thank you.
Thank you. By the way, one of my good friends is John Collins, who holds the current long-distance record for paper airplanes, which is an absolutely amazing 312 feet, I think.
Wow.
It's a little longer than a football field. Wow. And John is attempting to do something of the same thing I'm doing. He's attempting to get together an educational institution or organization that would use paper airplanes to teach kids aeronautics.
Interesting. Very interesting. You want to take another call?
Sure.
Caller, good evening. Welcome to K Talk. You're on with Nick Engler.
Pat, it's Harv. How are you?
Hey, what's going on?
Man, this guy he reminds me when I was 10 years old. When everything was possible. He still has the heart.
Yeah.
Well, I think you take any pilot and you scratch him and you find a 10-year-old inside.
Very true.
I love it, brother. When I was that age, there was only 4 people that came to mind. Washington Carver, the Wrights, Houdini, and Tesla. And I got to thinking all these years, gosh, how can I do half as good? I never have.
Well, I would say that the Wright brothers, I don't know and maybe Nick, we could talk a little bit about their attitude about life and their personalities, but they just seem like 2 guys that never gave up.
But they were, one of the things, you're right, they never gave up, but they had been raised in a family to be very confrontational and not to give in. They approached this, they argued with each other, and they went at it like cats and dogs, according to the neighbors.
Really?
But they used that energy from those to get themselves where they wanted to be. And I believe that in many ways they would take a problem that they would run across with their gliders or their powered airplanes as a personal affront or a challenge to be gotten to be nailed down and never ever give in.
You know, that was going to be my next question. Where do you keep going when you've been stopped so many times when you're inventing something? I don't mean they were inventing even Orville said there's no way we're going to go from coast to coast in 4 days. There's no engine available.
Well, that's true. And in fact, when Cal Rogers tried to fly from coast to coast in 1911 in a Wright airplane, Orville told him that he wasn't that the plane wasn't built for that kind of flight. And of course, Cal Rogers proved Orville right in that the plane that he took off over the Atlantic edge was not the same plane that he landed in when he got to California. But at the same time, he proved Orville wrong. He was every bit as tenacious as Orville was.
Nearly 50 years later, Yeager is breaking the speed of sound.
Yeah, it is. Aviation is an amazing human story.
I love it so much. Do you remember when we used to build these little motors and stuff out of them little packs?
You mean the rubber band stuff?
Rubber Band Man?
Yeah.
No, not the song.
No, the wind-up motors?
Yeah, all that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, with stick and tissue, balsa, sure.
Hey, ask your guest what he thinks about 3D printing.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Tonight our guest, Nick Engler, is joining us to talk about everything about the Wright brothers. Again, Nick, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for giving up some time on your weekend for us.
Oh, thank you. And just to tell your readers where we are now, somehow we have gone from the Wright brothers to 3D printing. Our last caller, Harv, asked me to comment about 3D printing, and you know, I absolutely am in love with the maker movement. I think the maker movement is one of the best things that has happened, not just to craftsmanship and artisans, but as one of the best things that's happened to education in a long time. In fact, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but back, I think it was in September, Newsweek did a huge article on the maker movement and how it's actually reshaping education in this country. People are actually working with their hands together. It's like suddenly it's okay to be working with your hands because you're using a computer and not a screwdriver or a saw.
Right.
So, I think one of the things that I have in mind for the website that we're building constantly is to create some files, 3D printing files, so that people could make 8-scale Wright flyers from our files, all working parts. So we're right now we're playing around with it. We've got some 3D files up showing airplanes in SketchUp, and where you can get a 3D PDF and turn the Wright flyer every which way. So we're beginning to approach that. The next thing we'll do is begin to pull pieces off those 3D PDFs and put them on 3D printers. So, in answer to Harv's question, 3D printing, love it. It's doing great things for education.
Well, it sure is. And you know, the thing is I mean, look at right now. They've got a 3D printer in the International Space Station. They're using it. I know in this country there's some there's some limitations, but I also know that I know that in other countries where you don't have the strict what do you call it? The really strict medical stuff, in some of these other countries, they're making prosthesis and they're making body parts with these things.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, there are some people in near here that are designing not sports-oriented prosthetics for people that are printed out, and they can adjust these parts to fit the physique of the person who needs them. One of the things I love about 3D printing is it makes it possible for anybody with a brain to make something, that's one of the reasons I started the Wright Brothers Aeroplane Company, is to get people working with their hands, their imaginations. Those two things, the hands and the brains and language, all evolved at exactly the same time. They're absolutely, positively connected. Your hands are connected to your brain, connected to your tongue, and the way you express yourself. As a matter of fact, among linguists, many linguists think that we first talked with our hands, using our voices for emphasis before we actually began forming words. But anyway, I'll go off that high horse.
Oh no, not at all. It's such a, again, it's a part of history. It's something that's going to take us into the future. Let me ask you, with the Wright Flyer. These are some of my questions, and we got a lot of questions sent in, and we'll get to them in the next hour. But with the Wright Flyer, is it still around? Is there any part of it around? Does it exist anymore?
Oh yeah. It's a central display at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum.
Okay, so is it a complete airplane?
Well, that's the argument, isn't it? Is it a complete airplane? The Wright Flyer, it made 4 flights on December 17th, 1903. After the 4th flight, a gust of wind came up, rolled the flyer over and over and over again, and virtually destroyed it. The Wright brothers packed it into 5 boxes, the pieces into 5 boxes, and sent it home. And they stored it in a little shed that they had behind their house. And they didn't touch it for years and years. In fact, Wilbur died in 1912, never having seen the Wright Flyer again. At some point in 1913, there was a flood that covered most of Ohio, Indiana, and some of Kentucky and Pennsylvania. And so the Wright Flyer was submerged for the better part of 2 weeks. And finally, in 1916, Orville decides to get out the pieces of the flyer and reconstruct the flyer, and to show at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And so, what is in those boxes? A bunch of broken wood. The cloth has been underwater, so it's probably mildewed beyond using. And if you look at the flyer that was showed in MIT, it has a brilliant white cloth covering. So how much of the flyer did Orville replace in 1916? Okay, they had already lost pieces of the engine. They sent parts of the engine to New York for an exhibition in 1906, and those were somehow misplaced and never made it back to Dayton, Ohio. So those 2 parts aren't the same in the Wright Flyer. The covering isn't the same as on the Wright Flyer. How much of the Wright Flyer hanging in the Smithsonian is really it was really flown at Kitty Hawk? I've heard estimates anywhere from 40% to 80%, and I don't know what to think. It's at this point it's anybody's guess. For all we know, Orville could have used those pieces as templates and made it all anew in 1916.
Gotcha. Now, did the Wright Flyer? Did it obviously had control surfaces, but weren't the control surfaces more of warping the surface more so than a conventional aileron or a rudder or an elevator?
Well, doesn't an aileron change the shape of the surface? I mean, basically, an aileron when you push it one way or the other,
right,
changes the camber of your wings. The one thing, okay, here's the difference. The aileron changes the camber of the wings when you move it. When you warp the wings, you're changing the angle of attack. The wing remains at the same camber, but now it's meeting the air at a different angle. So yes, they were using wing warping. Let me give you a quick bit of history and
Sure.
show you how the Wright brothers developed this over 6 airplanes. All right, the kite. Wilbur gets this idea. He's fidgeting in the bicycle shop, and he has uppermost in his mind how he can control an airplane in the air. And one of the reasons, by the way, he has this idea in his mind is because he and Orville have been thinking about it since 1896 when Lilienthal died. In 1898, Langley got $50,000 from the government to build an airplane, so Wilbur thought there's money in them there hills, because in 1898 there was also a tremendous crash in the bicycle business, and artisan makers like Wilbur and Orville were doing very, very poorly after that crash. Figure it out. When they first went into the bicycle business, they were selling handmade bicycles for $100 a piece. By 1898, Sears and Roebuck was on the scene selling them for $8.99. So they have a lot of competition. So they're looking for a way into the aviation industry, and they have figured out they're going to have to invent a control system to do it. The first thing that they think about is wing warping, because Wilbur does this experiment with a kite, and he shows that by warping the wings of the kite, he can make the kite roll in the sky. Okay, that's lateral stability. When you're flying along, you have to balance yourself in the air in order to keep the pointy end forward and the dirty side down.
Right.
If you it's also turning, because he notices that birds, and Wilbur is on very close terms with all the turkey vultures in the neighborhood. He notices that the turkey vultures bank the same way he banks a bicycle when he turns it. So not only is this lateral stability, it's also navigation. So he and Orville decide that they're going to build a manned glider. This is in 1899. They do the kite experiment. They're going to build a manned glider, and it's going to have warping wings so that they can bank into a turn and also to balance it. And they're going to put an elevator on it so that they can go up and down. Looking at birds, they figure that's all birds have. They had not yet figured out that a bird, in addition to being able to move its tail up and down, a bird can also twist its tail sideways one way or the other. So a bird uses its tail as both a rudder and an elevator. But the Wright brothers did not know this at that time. So they build a glider, but they're looking for a place where they can fly it and not kill themselves. And a lot of Lilienthal has killed himself. Percy Pilcher has killed himself, and other people have had some close calls. So they think, well, if we could fly this over sand, this would help, or some sort of soft ground. Sand would be especially good because sand has a physical property called hysteresis. And basically all hysteresis means is that it absorbs a punch. When you hit the sand, it does not hit you back. To this day, people learning to to hang glide, go to Kitty Hawk and learn to fly over the sand dunes, because you can crash from a fairly high altitude and walk away from it. So they write the Weather Service, and the Weather Service sends them some pamphlets, and they find that there's a little place called Kitty Hawk on some place called the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So they go there. Great place to fly a kite, only and a glider. Only the glider doesn't work well. They come back thinking that the glider has to be much bigger. So in 1901, they build a much bigger glider. It works worse than the first one. Now they're really tearing their hair out. They came close as they ever did to giving up, but they decide that that they can't be tracing back and forth to Kitty Hawk testing one glider at a time. They've got to be able to test a lot of different wing surfaces and figure out which is the best wing. Otherwise, they never will get where they're going. So they build a wind tunnel, test 200 different wing surfaces, pick a wing surface, build a glider around that wing surface in 1902, and lo and behold, it works great. Okay, except that when they try to turn it, it suddenly loses lift and hammers itself into the ground. And they do some thinking, and they think, okay, we've got warping wings so that we can roll, lateral balance. We've got an elevator so that we can go up and down, and that's also longitudinal balance. But what we don't have is a rudder for to roll this airplane around the vertical axis. So they add a rudder, and lo and behold, the thing works great. Now, at the same time, remember I told you that Langley has been given $50,000 to build an airplane for the military. Okay, he was supposed to have that airplane in the air by 1899. It's now 1902, and the military is starting to get real antsy. Langley has in fact, Langley is on beyond the $50,000. He's now up to about $73,000. One of the things I tell people is that even though Langley didn't invent the airplane, he invented the cost overrun, which was much more important. At any rate, Langley has been given an ultimatum by the military: fly in 1903, or we're pulling the plug. And the Wright brothers are suddenly in possession of this wonderful 1902 glider with 3-axis control that can fly circles around anything that Langley has flown. And they thought, if we add an engine to this, we could be the first to fly. So they spend the next year. They get home in November of 1902, and they spend the next year building the 1903 Flyer, which was basically an enlarged 1902 glider with an engine on it. And I don't want to belittle what was done, because they made some tremendous breakthroughs. The first aluminum case aviation engine, the first efficient propellers. There were a lot of things in this 1903 airplane that were works of genius in their own right.